Hello everyone, Caveman Spider here, and welcome to the first installment of Libertarian Book Reviews. Um, this is the first time I am making a YouTube video with my face for this very occasion because I'm making this new series. I myself am a libertarian, and basically, yeah, I really like liberty, as you could possibly tell. But liberty on its own, it's not just an emotion. There's actually a lot of reasoning behind it. You need to understand, for one to actually care about freedom, he has to understand, first of all, why it even matters, and second of all, how it even solves the issues of social order and economy and all these other things. And so, for that, you need books. And basically, I'm just going to do summaries of these libertarian books so that you might be interested in reading them if you yourself are interested in libertarianism, and just give an overview, a summary of these books and what I think of them. And for the first video, for the first installment of Libertarian Book Reviews, we are looking at Henry Hazlitt's Economics in One Lesson, a really famous one made by a really lovely author, Henry Hazlitt. He was a writer for the Foundation for Economic Education, and he was a brilliant writer. His prose, magnificent. In this book, reads really smoothly. It's a short read. It's like 200 pages. It's a short enough read, and it's a short read, but it also is a really nice read. It's smooth. His language goes well, and you can read it and follow through quite well. It's the language is good. It's easy to understand. Let's put it that way. Um, yeah, so I'd absolutely recommend reading it. It is a introduction to free market thought. It doesn't actually teach all of economics in a single lesson, but it teaches one lesson about economics that is very crucial to understanding basically one of the core ideas behind free market thought, and it's basically seeing the unseen. And this is basically one of the major pillars of the free market mindset, of the libertarian mindset in economics, and helps you actually view things through a different lens. Um, so, seeing the unseen, what is this? What is this one lesson? Well, as Hazlitt stated it, the one lesson of economics is that a good economist cares not only about the short run effects, but also the long run effects. And also, he does not simply look at how an economic policy affects one group of people, but how it affects the entirety of society. And so, a good economist looks at all of the effects, essentially. And what is the meaning behind this lesson? Well, this lesson is for his case, is demonstrated in Bastiat's broken window fallacy, which he purposes for this book and uses it throughout to show how many arguments for government policy actually commit this very fallacy, just in a different way, where they do not see the unforeseen consequences and only sell the visible consequences of government policy. So, what is the broken window fallacy? Well, imagine this. There's a shop, and some delinquent decides to throw a rock through the shop's window and smashes it into a billion pieces. The shopkeeper is very sad about it, but somebody points out, hey, this is actually a good thing because now you can pay somebody to fix the window and he will have money and he'll pay it out elsewhere and it will boost the economy. It's good for everybody. This kind of statement is fallacious because it focuses on the visible effects. Yes, the shopkeeper had to pay somebody to fix his window. However, he would have still spent this money even if his window wasn't broken. And this money he would have spent on the shopkeeper. He could have instead spent it on buying himself a fancy new jacket. And then this jacket owner would also spend his money elsewhere and would also boost the economy. So regardless, the money would still be spent somewhere. And the net effect is, in fact, of the broken window, in fact, compared to the opportunity cost, actually taking opportunity costs into mind, the broken window does not, in fact, boost the economy, but in fact, it shrinks it because the net effect is a broken window. The shopkeeper suffered a loss. He actually lost money because he had to spend something he could have spent on a fancy jacket. He instead had to spend on maintaining his window that he already had. So in fact, destructive policies do not in fact benefit the economy. And now this lesson is applied elsewhere in all kinds of government policy. He has like 20 chapters, 22 something, 23 maybe? Actually, let's check the book. Total of, there's a total of 25 chapters. Yeah, 25 chapters for his book. And I would cut them into a couple of sections. And in the first one, he mainly just he states the lesson, states the broken window fallacy, and basically gives a preliminary construction of how arguments for government policy work through the his first basic example, public works. Basically, the idea is, government spends its money on construction projects, building new roads, all kinds of stimulus that boosts the economy. And so, should government start spending more in these public works projects and boost the economy? The question is, does government spending actually boost the economy? Because the thing is, for government to actually spend its money somewhere, it had to first take it out of people by taxation. Now, what this means is, by taking money out of people by taxation, the visible effect is that the government did in fact spend its money on public works projects. However, the fact is that now these people do not have the taxpayers do not have their taxpayer money anymore that they could have spent on other projects. And in fact, what happens is not a gain in wealth, but a loss in wealth. Because the difference is it's in fact not even the same level of wealth. It's a loss in wealth. Because when the government spends its money on certain construction and public works projects, it has no way of figuring out whether it's a good project or a bad project because it does not profit or lose. It's the government. It just keeps earning in tax money, and whatever project it had basically does not earn. Well, maybe there's like some token fees, but in fact a lot of it is covered by taxpayer money. And so it does not actually know whether the gains actually justify the money spent. However, in a free market, when money is spent in a certain business, the business that spent its money to produce something, the consumer enforced its decision or decided to not enforce its decision by either paying or not paying for the product and generating either a profit or a loss. If a company profits, it has gained, and it means that it's actually giving more wealth to society because it's turning less valued goods into more valued goods. It had something cheaper and it turned it into something more expensive, meaning that it's something more valued. It created wealth. And if it lost, well, then it loses money. It goes out of the market because it was it was turning more valuable things into less valuable things, and it was overall creating losses for society. There's no way of telling whether a public works project is a gain or a loss. And in fact, in most cases, it is usually a loss because people weren't actually willing to spend on these public works projects. They wanted to spend on these places instead, and now they're forced to spend on places that they don't actually want to spend on. They don't want actually the costs very likely do not justify the government putting its money there, because if it really was justified, the people would have actually spent their money there in the first place. Of course, this does not fully apply with places where the government has a monopoly, which is really tricky and which causes certain economic calculation problems, but that's beyond the scope of this video. So that's basically the first part. And then he goes over to restate this lesson in a few other places, like employment. In fact, government employment programs do not create net employment, is one of Hazlitt's arguments, because when the government spends taxpayer money to employ people, instead, this money could have been spent to employ people by the taxpayers. They could have spent it on businesses, and these businesses could have, spent their money to employ people. In fact, government employment projects do not have net employment gains. And it's applied in a peculiar way to show that machinery, in our modern case, AI, is not such a bad thing for employment in the long run. Because in fact, yes, in the short run, you have a machine that is able to create far greater output with much less labor force, and so the labor force shrinks. However, because much less is spent on labor force, the product is far cheaper, which means people buy, or far more qualitative, which means people buy far more of it, which means far more profits flow into the company, which means that it can spend more on capital, but to maintain this capital, it needs labor. And so, in fact, labor flows back into the economy because this productivity means people are better off. They have more wealth overall, which means they have more wealth to spend on employment again. And so, employment in the long run, machinery in fact still creates employment. And if we really wanted 100% employment all the time, we could take it to radical extensions. We could just have, we could just pay people to ride horse carriages. That would create a lot of employment. We could pay people, instead of having tractors, we could just pay people to manually plant our seeds and to take everything out just like that. And we could just completely erase civilization, and we would be at 100% employment if we were at subsistence level hunter-gatherers. But are we actually better off? Primitivists would say yes, but me personally, who loves civilization, I would say no. Let's see. He also goes over protectionism. Basically, the argument is another kind of government policy is protectionism, where basically we're putting tariffs on foreign imports so that local businesses benefit. The problem is that by having these tariffs, by forcing people to spend more on a certain local business, they have less money to spend on other local businesses. There's the issue. For example, I don't know, maple syrup. We put a tariff on Canadian maple syrup so that we subsidize American maple syrup. I live in Latvia and not in America, but that's irrelevant. Yeah, we subsidize American maple syrup, and now Americans are forced. It's more effective for Americans to buy maple syrup because Canadian maple syrup is just much more expensive. However, because they're spending all their money on more expensive American maple syrup, because it hasn't actually increased in quality or become cheaper, it's basically the same it was. They have been forced to shift their money into this protected industry. And because they're spending more money in general, now, because they have to spend on these protected industries, they cannot spend their money in other places, in other American industries that could have seen their money. And in a fully unregulated case, where people spend their money on maple syrup and this American industry is in fact cheaper, more qualitative than whatever the American maple syrup was. It's more preferred by the American consumers. And these companies could have exported elsewhere, to Canada, for example. And so, let's say American cars. Instead of spending money on American maple syrup, we have people spending money on American cars, and we benefit heavily from this. And the gain from this is that we have both American cars and Canadian maple syrup, and we have the best of both worlds because people can spend their money on American cars and Canadian maple syrup. It's a cheaper and overall better deal, and just and we don't have, and in fact, by protecting local industries, we are hurting other local industries, and we are you hurt your national, you hurt the best your country can produce by having it produce something it's worse at by protecting a certain industry. Because the only way it's protected is because it's operating at a loss. It's creating a less valued product overall. So, going over this, there's one more case of where government intervention severely fails, and that is setting limits on prices. Actually, hold on. Protected industry is actually part of a greater argument. Forgot. Yeah, it's part of a greater section, which is limits on prices. What I explained was basically price floors. You basically try to make people spend more on things than they have to. But there's a flip side to this, and there's price ceilings, where you're trying to set minimum prices on things so that people can afford these things. For example, rent controls or minimum wage laws. Yes, minimum wages are not good, actually. Or I don't know, minimum prices for groceries. However, these minimum prices, what it actually does is because they're so cheap, people flood in to buy this, but because prices can't be raised, the good keeps being bought out. So there's basically no more of said good. And now there's a shortage. And in fact, the people who needed this good are now unable to get, basically the people who needed this good the most were the ones who were willing to pay the most for it, are now unable to do so because somebody else bought it before him. And basically, we can't please everybody with the good, and now we have a shortage of the good. And what results from this is, for example, with if you, and with this good in general, because it's so cheap, the company can't profit from producing it, and so it just stops producing it, and just makes the shortage even worse. Because yeah, it's just artificially cheap. Its production costs don't justify the cash flow it's getting from it, and so they just stop producing it. So you get a shortage. For example, with rent controls, what you get is, for example, if you put a rent freeze, landlords cannot profit off of the homes they're building anymore, so they just stop building houses, and now there's no houses, and you get an even worse situation. Or with minimum wage laws, where you set a minimum wage, people who who do work that is worth less than the minimum wage, lower skilled workers now are unable to get a job because nobody will take their job because their skills, their work doesn't actually justify the wage. So they actually earn nothing instead of very little, which is overall worse off. And so price controls also have their invisible consequences. And here's another government policy that shows to actually not achieve the consequences that it sells. And then he goes over the last 3 chapters, which are pretty good as well. He basically explains profits. I think I already did, but I guess a second time. A company, when it makes more money than it loses, it's gaining a profit. And this is actually a good thing for society. Profits are good. We need capitalists to make profits because profits signal that, yeah, they're turning less valued goods into more valued goods because people are willing to spend more on these goods. And this means that they're doing a good thing. And we want people to make more of more valued goods. We want people to make wealth rather than destroy it. And this is why we need profits and the inverse of losses, and why the free market is really good, that people who do not make good products eventually get cleared out of it. And the government actually makes things worse because it creates many industries and protects many industries, and it does its own public works that actually are basically less valued than the resources that it used, and they could have been better spent elsewhere by the consumers of the free market. Then he goes over inflation to show that, okay, maybe instead of taking tax money, we could just print money and use that to spend. However, it dilutes the currency, and overall, you don't actually generate wealth because you're just printing dollars. And in fact, there's a very major problem with inflation is that um, it doesn't just fail to create more wealth. It actually shifts wealth to the places where it shouldn't be shifted. It creates malinvestment through Cantillon effects. Basically, um, because a bunch of money has been printed, it goes to the first beneficiaries of inflation are the ones who benefited the most. Now they didn't actually earn it through profiting through selling more valued goods, but they earned, and so they're basically able to expand their industry even though the demand doesn't actually justify them expanding themselves, expanding their wealth. Now, where they spend their money elsewhere, um, is basically another industry that earns a little bit but doesn't earn as much because the industry before them has raised their prices. So they can't earn their money there, but they can spend their money elsewhere in other places where the adjustment to inflation has not yet happened. And the last people down the line are the last people who receive this cash, but they gain nothing from it. In fact, they have lost because all the businesses around them have already adjusted and have already raised their prices because of the fact that the fake money has flooded into the economy. And what you get is people have lost wealth at the basically for other people's gain. And this is actually bad for the economy because the people who have gained are not the ones who have actually produced something more valuable. Malinvestment has occurred, in fact. So there's a genuine problem with inflation. And the final chapter, he before restating the lesson, so the penultimate chapter, he goes over explaining why savings are a good thing, actually. Basically, during his time, there was a major social stigma around saving, and every once in a while there is, and basically the idea that we can fix our economy by spending more, by having people spend more money on things. Problem with that is to spend, you need to save first. And when you discourage saving, and by making people spend more, you're actually hurting what allows spending to happen in the first place. Um, for example, what happens is if you spend all your money lavishly on some kind of luxury goods and don't actually invest any of it, what happens is that you get the luxury goods, and overall you haven't actually production hasn't actually significantly expanded. It has oriented itself around luxury goods, yes, but resources have just been diverted to places. Now, when you save your money, you usually don't just hide your dollars in a mattress, but even if you do so, the purchase other people's dollars become more valuable because there's less money, and they can invest it themselves. When they invest money, they put it into actual businesses that actually create capital goods. And with these, basically, what people neglect to notice is that you need saving to create these capital goods, which actually create the consumer goods and make spending more affordable and make it possible to spend in the first place. And if you start spending too much to the point that nothing can be invested anymore, you're basically eating the acorn before it can grow into a tree. And yeah. You've basically, for example, I don't know, a Minecraft example is you get a potato from a zombie. Instead of planting that potato, under consuming in the first place, not spending, first letting it grow into something, um, instead of letting that potato grow into more potatoes, you just eat the potato immediately, and you go much hungrier later, and it hurts you in the long run. Now, instead, if you planted that potato and had the short-term loss of not eating that potato, short-term underconsumption, you could have grown that potato and turned that into more potatoes. And basically, saving, not spending, and letting those resources be used to create things first actually allows you to get much more things. And so spending does not actually solve the issue of creating wealth. It is in fact saving that creates the wealth, and spending is just the enjoyment of it. That's about it. I know I've not summarized this in the best way possible. I'm just starting out. Maybe I should have written a script, maybe, but I want to do this in a more improvised way so that it feels a little more authentic. But I think I have more or less explained a good chunk of Hazlitt's book. There's a lot more in the details. The devil is in the details, but if you want that, you're going to have to read the book yourself. I really recommend getting it. Yeah. Basically, this is Economics in One Lesson. This is the summary. Personally, I think it's a really good book. I enjoyed it significantly. I really liked reading it. One of basically, okay, there's other books that I'm going to review that I like much more, but this is one of the top books. This is the first libertarian book I read, essentially. And I would recommend you reading it as well. It teaches a really valuable lesson that you look at not just the visible, but the invisible effects of a policy. And it can be applied to life as well, in general. And, yeah, if you're interested in free market thought or libertarianism, I highly suggest this book. That's about it. Next time, I think I will review a book by Peter Schiff. Not because I like it, but because I've read it, and I just feel like I have to make a review on it. And yeah, next time I will do it in the same format, but next time I will improvise better. I will hone the art of improvisation so that I can do it quicker and do it more composed and overall, but I want to improvise. I want to learn how to improvise these book reviews because I want to do it authentically. Video essays are something where I'd actually speak from a script, but here I want to do things unscripted. Yeah, I hope you guys enjoy this video. Hope you enjoyed this lesson of economics looked at through many angles. Hope you apply it. Hope you take it into heart. If you think otherwise, be sure to drop your thoughts in the comments. But yeah, read Hazlitt, and hope you guys enjoy this video. I'll see you on the next one. Goodbye.